As you know, my name is Kainton the Tech Pro, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to set up Kubernetes locally on your system and also be able to deploy a SpringBoot application to a local Kubernetes cluster. The step-by-step tutorial of what I'm going to be doing is right here in my website. So this is the procedure I'm going to be following. It's set up right here, so you can follow the same procedure. As a prerequisite, you need to have a basic knowledge of Docker. Previously, I've made a tutorial on how to Dockerize your SpringBoot application. That simply means create a Docker image of your SpringBoot application. It's as simple as that. And to do that, you need to use a Docker file. You should have a basic knowledge of what a Docker file is. So today we are talking about Kubernetes and not Dockers or Docker images. Okay, before we talk about the actual practical Kubernetes and how to deploy to Kubernetes cluster, you need some basic knowledge of these terms. First, what is Kubernetes? Kubernetes is a container orchestration tool. Meanwhile, before I continue, I want to recommend you subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any updates from me. And also, if you have any challenges whatsoever following my class or my lessons, please leave me a comment in the comment box below. And also, maybe write me an email, connect with me on my social network profile, that will be fine. So Kubernetes is used to manage containers. Why do you have to manage containers? Because you want to maintain high availability. If something fails, you can be sure that something else starts. Your application continues to work even if something fails. And also, if you want to deploy different environments, a container orchestration tool like Docker or Kubernetes helps you to maintain the same configuration as you deploy across various platforms. So Kubernetes is a container orchestration tool. I think it was developed initially by Google. Now Kubernetes runs on the cloud, right? It runs in Google Cloud. But to have it on your local environment, in your Mac or your Windows or your Linux local system, you need a tool called Minikube. Minikube helps you to have a local Kubernetes cluster on your local machine. So you don't have to have a cloud account for you to learn Kubernetes. You simply have to use Minikube. You're going to be setting it up today. And what is a cluster? A cluster is a collection of one or more nodes. So if you have, let's say, in an environment, you can have a network of one computer, two computers. These computers are actually called nodes. So in this case, all of them are networked. You have a cluster. So a cluster is simply a collection of one or more computers, and these computers or nodes inside this cluster, they have to be virtual machines. In real life, like in data centers, you can also have physical machines forming a cluster, but in containerization, it has to be virtual machines. So that's a cluster. A node is a participant in a cluster. So if you have a cluster, you have any computer, a virtual machine there is called a node. So these are actually nodes, okay? All right. Now, what is a pod? Now, this is where it becomes interesting. So if you have inside a node, for instance, let's say this is a node like this. So this guy here is what we have here. So we have this node here, okay? We can have small computers right inside this node as well, okay? So inside a node, you can also have subdivisions called pods. So a pod is the smallest unit of a container that can run, and a pod runs inside a node. So you understand it now. A cluster is made up of nodes, and inside this node, you can have pods. So when we are deploying our applications, they are running as pods inside nodes. What is kubectl? Kubectl is a command line tool for managing your containers in Kubernetes. So kubectl is a tool that you can use to manage, enter commands, and then give commands and instructions to the cluster and be able to perform certain operations. So try to make sure you understand this concept because it's really going to help you a lot. So I'm going to close up this application right now. Explanation of all of this is right here in my website. So you can read the definitions right here and also see how it works. All right, so the first thing we want to do is to download and install Docker. I'm sure you've done that, so simply download and install Docker. Step 2, install Minikube. If you are using Mac, please run the command brew install Minikube. I've also done this as well. And then you need to use the command Minikube start. So I'm going to my command line right here. I'm going to say Minikube. First, let's make sure that Docker is working. So I'm going to say Docker PS. So it's going to show me the containers that are there. So we only have one container, and that's Minikube. And let me apply my console, and I can also say Minikube status. Now we have Minikube start. You have to run Minikube start first before you do the status. I've also run Minikube start, and Minikube is already running, and now you have the status right here. Okay, so let's now go into the real tutorial. We want to build an image of our application. Now if I go to enter the command docker images, you see that we don't have an image of our application. This application is called Kubernetes demo, okay? So I want to create an image of this application, and to do that I need to use a Docker file. So you need to create a Docker file. This is my Docker file. And you can see that this is the simple content of this Docker file. Actually, it says from this you can get a template from here. You can have this target. So this target, you have it from here. Okay, Kubernetes 0 snapshots. So this is what we have. This jar file here and is exposed as app.jar, and this is app.jar. So you don't have to worry about this. Just copy this and paste, and then modify. I think this is the only thing you have to modify right here. Okay. But before you have this jar file, you need to run this application using npm install. I think you have npm install, or if you click on this run button here, is to run the application and actually build up the jar file for you. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to run a command that makes Kubernetes work with Docker. So this command called eval minikube docker env helps you to give Minikube access to your Docker repository. Okay, so first let's run this command. So I'm going to say eval $minikube docker -env and enter. And now I'm going to build the image for this application. So I'm going to say docker build. Give me 1 second. So I'm going to come out from the resources folder, because you can see I'm in resources folder here. So I'm going to come out of the folder to the base directory that contains the Docker file. So I'm going to come out like the cd. Okay, so I'm in the src. Actually, the Docker file is outside the src, so I'm going to do one more time. Okay. So if I say now ls, we can see that we have our Docker file right here. Okay, perfect. So for you to run this command, you need to have your Docker file in the same directory. So I'm going to say docker build -t. That's -t. The target is SpringBoot. That's the name. I'm going to call it SpringBoot Kubernetes. The name is optional. It's something you can change to something else, but for simplicity, I'm going to just give it this name. I'm giving it a tag 1.0. If you don't specify a tag, it's going to give it a tag called latest. And specify the directory containing the Docker file you want to use. The Docker file is in the same directory as this application. So I'm going to give a space and give it a dot. So I'm going to hit the enter key, and I think it did create. Let's see. Okay, so I think it builds the image. So let's use docker ps or docker images to check if the image was built. Okay, so I have a whole lot of things here. Okay, so the first one is the one we are interested in. We have the SpringBoot Kubernetes, so we have our image built. Now we need to create a deployment. Now we have our image and we want to deploy it to Kubernetes cluster. And we are saying that Minikube is a local Kubernetes cluster running, on your local machine, but Minikube is containing only one single node. So a Minikube is a cluster that runs on your local machine but contains only one node, but it can have several pods. Remember, we say that a node can have several pods, right? So we are not restricted. We can also have we can also replicate our application into several containers, but they have to be now pods and not nodes. All right. Okay, so the first thing we want to do now is to create a deployment, and I'm going to run this command to create the deployment. So let me go back to the command line now. So first, let me clear my console. Clear. So kubectl create deployment, and I'm going to call this deployment the same name as the container, as the image, but you can also use another name. Create deployment SpringBoot Kubernetes. I want to specify the image that we are going to be using for this deployment. So I'm going to say minus -- image is going to be SpringBoot hyphen Kubernetes. And we're also going to specify the ports we want it to run in the container. The tag is 1.0 and -- port is going to be equal to second. Let me just sure I'm not mixing up anything. So the image is equal to and the port is equal to 8080. Okay. So there is a port. It's going to be running inside the container and it's going to be accessible from the outside. Okay, so this is going to create a deployment. So I'm going to hit enter and a deployment is created. A deployment helps you to deploy your application to Kubernetes cluster. So now we've created a deployment, and this deployment actually also starts Kubernetes, your application, deploys it into the Kubernetes cluster and spins up the container. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run a command to check that actually the deployment was created. So I'm going to say kubectl get deployment, and you can see that we have one deployment and it's ready and it's up and running. Now I want to see the pods now. Okay, I want to see the pods inside the node because the pods has been created and we want to see the pods. So I'm going to say kubectl get pods. So we have only one pod running. So this one pod is simply like the container where your application is running. Okay. Now to check that the Spring Boot application is actually started and running inside this pod, you can actually say kubectl logs and give the pod name. The pod name is what we have here. So I'm going to simply copy this pod name and paste it. So I'm going to paste it right here and say enter. So now you can see that it says Tomcat started on port 8080, exactly the same way your application starts when you use Spring Boot. So Tomcat started on port 8080, but this time inside the pod. Okay, now we have this application running inside the pod. We are not able to access it from the outside. For us to be able to access it from the outside, we need to create something called a service. And to do that, we use a command called expose deployment. So that's going to create a service for us that's going to expose that deployment, that application running inside the pod, inside the cluster. We can access it from the outside. Without a service, you'll not be able to access it from the outside. So I'm going to create a service by using kubectl expose deployment and specify the name of the deployment. The name of the deployment is SpringBoot Kubernetes, and specify type is equal to node port. So what it means is we specify the IP address of the cluster, then we specify the node, and that's the node port. So the type is equal to node port, which is port 8080, which we already used when we created the deployment. I'm going to hit the enter key, and the service is created and exposed. So if I want to see the service, I can just say kubectl get services, and now you can see that it has a service called SpringBoot Kubernetes, which we created. The type is node port, and the cluster IP is this, and we have the port to be 8080. Okay, so now to get the service URL, which is actually a combination of the cluster IP and the node port, we can simply enter the command. This is a service. We can simply enter the command minikube service, and it's simply going to give us a URL to access this service inside the container. So I'm going to say minikube service and specify the name of the service and hit the enter key. It's going to give us exactly the URL for the service, which we have. Okay, the first one. So this is the second one, which is this. So we have 128.0.0.1. So it's running right inside the container. Permit me to just check this. Okay. So this is the internal, I think. So we are not able to access it from here. Okay, so we have the service URL provided for us right here. There is a service URL right here. And now we've deployed to Kubernetes. And we have one node, one cluster, one node, one port, and you see how to check all of these. But now we need a way to access this from a UI, from a dash. We need a dashboard to access it from a UI. And that is why we can use a Minikube dashboard. So I'm going to say Minikube dashboard, and now it's going to open up the browser dashboard to help us see what is happening right here inside the Kubernetes cluster. It gives us opportunity to look right inside the Kubernetes cluster. So it takes a few seconds, and it's going to open up the default browser, and we're able to see what is happening inside the cluster. Now we have this pod we mentioned. The pods are described to be ephemeral, meaning that if a pod is destroyed, it immediately creates another one. So you can be sure that you have complete high availability once you are using Kubernetes. So it's taking some time. So let's give it a few seconds and see what we have. Alright, so you can see that it opens the dashboard. So this is what the dashboard looks like. Maybe I'm going to send this way. Okay. So now you can see the deployment. We have one deployment, we have one pod here, and we have replica sites. For now, it's just one. Now these pods, like I mentioned, is described to be ephemeral. So we have so if I go to this place and just delete this pod and say delete, it's going to recreate another pod immediately. So actually it creates another pod automatically. So we have one deployment, we have pod 1 of 1 is running. So you can have this, a new pod is created just 14 seconds ago. So I'm going to you can also play around with it, so I'm not going to continue here. So this is how to create a Kubernetes cluster. Deploy your SpringBoot application to Kubernetes cluster, start up the Kubernetes cluster, your application inside the pod, and also access the Minikube dashboard. Now we've done this, but the normal way to do this, there's a second way to do this using deployment. You're right. We need to create deployment.yaml file and a service.yaml file. So this is one thing you need to know, and in the next tutorial I'm going to show you how to actually create deployment.yaml file and specify the configuration in your deployment.yaml file, and use deployment and a service configuration to deploy your application to Kubernetes cluster. For now, I hope this has been informative for you. I hope you understand what we did. Please leave me a comment if this has been informative for you or if you have any challenge whatsoever. And also feel free to follow my Fleet TMS version 2 tutorial in this channel. I remain Times on the Tech Pro and I'm always there for you.